Good afternoon. I'm Kay Jacobson, the History Coordinator of the Ramsey County Libraries, and it's my pleasure to welcome you to the popular ongoing presidential series created by historian J.B. Andersen. Today's talk is the first in the series focusing on Abraham Lincoln. I know we've jumped ahead from James Madison, but as JB said, history, we can go anywhere. So today's program is being brought to you through the Ramsey County Libraries and our co-sponsorship with Oster Lifelong Learning Institute of the University of Minnesota. We're deeply grateful to both of these organizations for providing funding so that we can bring this program to you. So I'd like to invite JB to come on, and we just want to hope that everyone will have plenty of questions at the end of the program. Take it away, JB.
Thanks. Yes, doing Abraham Lincoln today. Now, I have to look around a little bit. I have a keyboard in front of me, so I won't be looking directly at you all the time. I need to advance slides, and I also need to check on the time occasionally and see how we're doing. So I'll be glancing away occasionally. I know that can be difficult when you want to have eye contact with the speaker. Today we're doing Abraham Lincoln. There are lots of myths, actually lies even, about presidents. George Washington, I cannot tell a lie. I chopped down the cherry tree with this new axe that you gave me, he tells his father. That was written about in the 1830s, long after Washington's death, by a man named Parson Weems. And he wanted to tell stories that would be good and enlightening for children about not lying, for instance. Same thing with Lincoln. There are lots of stories. The first time I did Lincoln, I had 500 slides. And this has been over the last 20 years. Second time I did Lincoln, I had 1,000 slides. This time I have 1,500 slides. So we're going to tell lots of stories, many of them generally unheard. And I've used lots of different books and authors and etc. So let's begin. Lincoln's life was from February 12th of 1809, his birth, to Saturday, 15 April 1865, when he was assassinated at Ford's Theater. His lifespan, 56 years, 2 months, 4 days, or 647 months, 4 days, or 20,517 days. His presidency ran from Monday, March 4th of 1861 to Saturday, 15 April 1865. He died the morning after being shot. And what's that March 4th? His presidency began. That's right. It took a long time to travel back in Lincoln's day. If you were the president elected and you were in Illinois, you had a pretty slow move by the time you'd get to Washington, D.C. It was not until Franklin Roosevelt that we changed Inauguration Day to January. In England, when they elect a new parliament, they start the next day after the elections. I mean, there really isn't any reason that we need a couple of, 2.5 months basically now, even though we did have 4.5 months at one time, or almost 5 months. Anyhow, the length of his presidency was 4 years, 1 month, and 12 days. That's 49 months, 12 days, or 1,504 days. Talk about Lincoln's birth. He was born on a bed of corn husks, such as you see here. Corn husks were frequently used for bedding. They were reasonably soft and could last a while. Feathers were very difficult to use. It took a great deal of them. You needed to have tons of birds that you could remove feathers from. And generally, in 1809, when someone was born, there was no physician present, no doctor. Usually, people from the surrounding neighborhood, other women would come to aid in the birth. Peggy Walters was a neighbor to the Lincolns on the day that Abraham was born, and she assisted in the delivery. And she was interviewed about it and wrote about it. And basically, most important thing is she called it a normal birth, no major problems for his mother or for himself. This is amazing. He was born the same day, month, and year as Charles Darwin, February 12th of 1809. Both of these men born on exactly the same day. Charles Darwin, as you're aware, is the evolutionary theorist. Actually, today it's a law. Evolution is, so he actually was a fact finder. We're going to spend quite a while here talking about a disease that it's assumed that Lincoln had. This is 105 slides. And the disease is called Marfan's syndrome. So let's first define syndrome. Syndrome means a collection of symptoms. Sometimes you might only have one thing that's wrong. I got a headache up here and that's it. But some diseases have several symptoms. And a famous disease today that is called a syndrome that you probably all heard about is irritable bowel syndrome. So syndrome simply means a collection of symptoms. So let's take a look at, hang on, there we go. Let's take a look at the symptoms. This disease that many doctors today have discerned to be a disease that Lincoln had. One of the symptoms of it was long fingers and toes. In the graphic here, you can see at the top image, those are normal hands and arms. The bottom image is what a person with Marfan syndrome has for fingers and a forearm. Much longer, thinner forearm, fingers much longer. So elongated fingers, elongated arm bones is a common feature. Lincoln was very tall and thin, fits that. Long fingers, the medical term is arachnodactyly, and that's simply a person that has unusually long fingers. Long toes also. Here's a photograph of a person with Marfan syndrome, and you can see their toes are unusually long, called dolichostenomelia, is lengthy or very long toes. Long limbs, arms, and legs. Here's a modern day photograph of a person. You can see they're very thin, generally tall. That's hard to discern here without a measuring stick available, but they didn't do that for these photos. You can see the arms are long and thin, same with the legs. Also, on the back, there are stretch marks, such as you see here. That's a common feature of people with Marfan's syndrome. Also, tall stature. Here's a picture of Lincoln during the Civil War with two other men. And even though he's wearing a top hat, you can see that he is several inches taller than either of these gentlemen. And we're going to talk about these guys in that photo for a few slides here. On the left is Allan Pinkerton, a name that's famous to this day in the United States. Pinkerton ran a detective agency. And on the right is General John McClernand. On your far right are close-up images of Pinkerton and McClernand's heads. Pinkerton was from Scotland, so he was an immigrant into the United States. He settled in Chicago, where he started a barrel making firm. And there was a murder in Chicago, and the sheriff needed help. And the sheriff just rode the street and picked whoever was around up. Pinkerton was one of those men, said, "You got to come with me. We're forming a posse. We got to track down a guy." And Pinkerton was so enthralled with the excitement of being on a posse that he thought, in addition to running my barrel making company, I'm going to start a detective agency, which he called the Pinkerton National Detective Agency. There was no Secret Service yet. Even once the Secret Service was founded, it was not used to guard presidents. The guarding of presidents did not begin until 1901 with the assassination of Warren Harding, McKinley. And in 34 years, 1865, 36 years, 1865 to 1901, 3 presidents were assassinated. So then people started saying, hey, we need to guard these guys. But before the Secret Service existed as a guard agency for presidents in 1901, with Theodore Roosevelt being the first president to be guarded around the clock, if a president wanted to be guarded, a private agency had to be hired. And Pinkerton provided that service and was a guard for Lincoln. His agency was. This is General John McClernand, and he was a friend of Lincoln's. They knew each other back in Illinois, and McClernand becomes a general during the Civil War. McClernand fought in some very famous battles, Belmont, Fort Donelson, probably the biggest major battle that he was a part of was Shiloh. And there's a picture of him standing. That's him from the image of Pinkerton, Lincoln, and McClernand. Note both of these guys. They've got a hand inside their suit coats, the uniform and the outerwear here. Well, guess who started that tradition? Napoleon did. This is a painting of Napoleon. Photography didn't exist yet, but he wanted his image painted, and he wanted to have his hand inside his vest, such as you see here. That became a standard pose for lots of men once photography was developed, to put your hand inside your vest or your outer coat. Made you seem like Napoleon. Historians are regularly polled about who's the greatest military person of all time, and Napoleon has always been the winner. So people were really wanting to revere this gentleman even back in the 1800s. Here's a larger image of the painting of Napoleon with his hand inside his vest. Marfan syndrome. Let's take a more longer look again at symptoms. A curvature of the spine, which is known as scoliosis. Here's a picture of a person's back, and you can see the spine is bent, and that's or curved. And that's another symptom that we see in people with Marfan syndrome. Also, a tremendous amount of flexibility in the joints of the body. For instance, here's a hand being pushed down, and the fingers are at a 90-degree angle to the wrist. That's way beyond normal body flexibility for people. Here is the palm turned downward in the arm almost to 90 degrees, again, beyond normal flexibility. And you can try that if you want, see how far down you can get your own wrist bent. Also, flat feet are a symptom of Marfan's syndrome. The top image here is a normal arch, and you can see that there is space between the floor and the bottom of the foot. The bottom image is a flat-footed person. Their foot is conjoined directly with the flooring there. Also, a high palate in the mouth causes a speech impediment. Lincoln had a high, squeaky voice, and he also had this raised roof of the mouth, such as you see a photo of here. And again, a symptom of Marfan's syndrome. Also, stooped shoulders. Now, Woody Allen and Don Knotts do not have Marfan's syndrome, but they do have stooped shoulders. And you can see from this picture of Lincoln that he also has shoulders that are not squared off from his neck, but are stooped shoulders also. Spontaneous pneumothorax is another symptom of Marfan's syndrome. This is air that escapes from your lungs, and it escapes into the pleural. So here's the lung, here's the pleural, and that's the space between your chest wall and your lung, and the air escapes in there. And as it builds up, it can then cause the lung to collapse. So collapsed lungs are a frequent sign of Marfan syndrome that occurs in most people that have that disease. Dural ectasia, that's a weakening of the membrane that encases the spinal cord. And here is the spinal cord in the middle. And this is the duria. It is the lining around the spinal cord. Here's a vertebrae here in the spine. And this is a connective tissue disorder. In other words, the membrane gets weakened, and it becomes difficult situation. Also in the chest, pectus excavatum, sunken chest, pectus excavatum, such as you see here. They're between the nipples of the body, the chest is sunken where the breastbone is located. There's also a lot of muscle pain in the lower back, in the legs, in the abdomen. So it reaches from the back all the way around to the abdomen and down into the legs, just a generalized pain. Also, headaches are not uncommon among people with Marfan syndrome, and it can be any one of the three types of headaches: migraine on your left, which is one-sided, tension headache, which is across the forehead, or a cluster headache, which tends to occur in spots such as over the eye. There are cardiovascular abnormalities. That means there's heart problems. And here are some early stethoscopes that were invented to listen to the heart. Reason the stethoscope was invented wasn't for a medical advance. It was invented by this René Laennec, a Frenchman, in 1816. And they were very divisively referred to as body listeners. Most doctors didn't believe in these stethoscopes when they first came out. And so this derisive term of body listener was aimed at doctors who used a stethoscope. But it wasn't invented to so that you could listen to the heart. That was already being done, but it could only be done by the doctor placing his ear against the chest of the patient. Well, it was all male doctors. They wanted to listen to a female heart. This could be quite embarrassing, putting your head very close to a female's chest. So the stethoscope was invented so that the doctor could hold his head back away from the female chest. Cardiovascular abnormalities, these are heart problems. A dilation of the aorta. Here's the aorta, main artery attached to the heart, and it enlarges. This is a dilated aorta, an enlarged artery there. Cardiovascular abnormalities included in these heart problems are a ballooning of the aorta. This is known as an aneurysm, and it can take a couple different forms. Here you can see it blows up and outward, both sides of the aorta, or it can simply create a large depression in one side of the aorta, such as you see in the bottom image there. There's 5 major heart problems that often show up with people that have Marfan syndrome. One is fatigue. Frequently today, even doctors ask, do you have any shortness of breath? They're really asking about how your heart is functioning. So do you get fatigued quickly, such as the woman in this photograph looks like, oh boy, and she also looks like, hey, I have to catch my breath. And you can have heart palpitations where your chest seems to be fluttering. Fourth, a racing heart, sometimes a rapid heartbeat, and a murmur of the heart. This is an unusual sound coming from the heart, and that can be caused by the valves narrowing downward, or a valve in the heart that leaks. And again, symptom of Marfan's syndrome. Heart problems. Let's relate this particular item to Lincoln. On Monday, October 24th of 1864, he could not get out of bed. He needed help. It is assumed by doctors today, from what doctors in Lincoln's day wrote about him, that he had had a heart attack. And this was 2 weeks before the 1864 election, Lincoln running for 2 terms. So the election was November 8th of 1864. Today, that would be a major news item. In Lincoln's day, became pretty much unknown. At any rate, it is believed that Lincoln had a heart attack on this 24 October of 1864, which is common among Marfan's syndrome people. Also, eye problems, glaucoma in particular. That's where there's damage to the octave nerve in the eye, and it puts a lot of pressure on the eye. Also, astigmatism, and that's a focusing problem with the eyes. And nearsighted. Most Marfan syndrome people, almost all, are nearsighted. Lincoln happened to be farsighted, so this is a place where there is a discrepancy between Lincoln and Marfan's syndrome. Glaucoma is a lot of pressure from inside the eye, pointing outward, such as you see here. Here's the optic nerve back here. A normal eye on your left here. Here's the pupil. Light comes in and it hits directly on the back of the retina. That's normal vision. Here is an astigmatic eye. You get a shortened focal area here in the eye, and it's a focusing problem. And this shows nearsightedness. This is farsightedness, which is what Lincoln had. Focusing point is beyond the retina, not in front of it, as it is for nearsightedness. So, at any rate, Lincoln has just the opposite effect of people that have Marfan's syndrome. Nearsighted, Lincoln, although Lincoln was farsighted, and here's more images of how the eye operates. Also, in the eyes, there's a dislocation of the eye. This is a connective tissue disorder, and the eye tends to lock in a upward gaze. Here is Lincoln's eyes, and you can see his right eye is looking directly out at us. His left eye is raised more upward. There's more white showing at the base. And that is a sign of Marfan's syndrome. Let's take a look at some other people, famous people who we know had or have Marfan's syndrome. This is Akhenaten, Egyptian pharaoh. Note the elongated face. 13th century BC. So this guy is, 3,300 years ago or more, slightly more. He also invented monotheism. The Egyptians had several different gods, and one of them was the sun. And Akhenaten said the sun is the only god. This got a whole lot of priests within the Egyptian religion concerned because they were, how they were aimed at some other deity. And now all of a sudden they have to admit that the deity they've been sponsoring is not the only god, as Akhenaten stated. So consequently, this is the earliest notion of monotheism. So this is the guy that invented the concept of a single god. His successor, the super famous King Tut, or Tutankhamun. Here's King Capuchin, an Italian king. He's buried in a catacomb in Palermo, Italy. You can see incredibly elongated body, elongated face. Look at the fingers. Tremendously elongated. Nicola Paganini, famous musician, composer, violin player. Here's a painting of Paganini. Here's a drawing of Paganini. Note the skinny arms and legs, the tall, thin appearance, and full body image drawing of him. You certainly can see these same characteristics that Lincoln had. Sergei Rachmaninoff, here's a photograph of him, famous pianist. Here are pictures of his hands with elongated fingers. Daniel Barenboim, the famous conductor and pianist of our age, had a 9-key reach on a piano keyboard. Rachmaninoff had a 13-key reach. You can see the hands side by side. Here I have about a 8-inch reach. Now, 13 keys is the length of this ruler, a foot. Here is a list of several famous pianists. Scriabin, 8 keys. Dame Mira Hess, 9 keys. Daniel Barenboim, 9 keys. Lang Lang, 12 keys, very long reach. Liszt, the famous composer, 13-key reach, and Rachmaninoff, 13-key reach. Rachmaninoff was 6 feet 6 inches tall. Once he was able to reach, and for those of you that know music, this may mean something, he was able to reach C, E flat, G, C, G with his left hand. And Rachmaninoff, again, 12-inch finger spread. Here's my finger spread, it's 8 inches. Julius Caesar, Suetonius, who wrote about these famous leaders in the Roman Empire, described Julius Caesar as tall in stature. So some people are saying he may have been a Marfan's candidate also, although his face in this statue image certainly is not elongated. You may remember this gentleman, Vincent Scaravalli. He made many movies, frequently bit parts, most famous for Ghost and Amadeus. And he is a Marfan's syndrome person. Oh. Michael Phelps. Phelps is 6 feet 4 inches tall. His arm span is 6 feet 7 inches. That's greater than his height. Oops. And that arm span to height ratio is 1.04. For Marfan syndrome, it has been defined as a clinical cutoff at 1.05 or longer. So he's pretty close. He also has these hypermobile joints, where he bend his wrist way down to a 90-degree angle from his forearm. And this is true in his knees, shoulders, ankles. Barack Obama. Look at the fingers on Obama here when he's holding his hand up to an audience. And he does have the tall and long look. What causes Marfan syndrome? This is pathogenesis. That means what causes diseases is what that word means. Here's a book on parthenogenesis, how germs made history. It's a history book. You can buy it on Amazon. Chromosome 15, FBN1, there's a gene defect there. And the gene is responsible for fibrillin, and that's what makes you hyper jointed, aids in the elasticity of connective tissue, and that can that is what really makes your joints incredibly mobile. These fibers, these elastic fibers, they're in the heart, they're in the ligaments of your body, they're in the eye, all the places we've talked about as being special conditions for people with Marfan's syndrome. Chromosome 15, again, FBN1 gene defect, and it's the elasticity that becomes defective and causes the disease. Excuse me. It's a connective tissue disorder. Here are the 4 kinds of tissue: nervous, muscle, epithelial, and connective. And Marfan syndrome is a connective tissue disorder. Epidemiology. That's how diseases occur in groups of people. It basically means it's a study of diseases that occur among people. Affects males and females equally, Marfan syndrome does. So it's not like 90% males get this. It's a 50-50 occurrence. About 1 in every 5,000 Americans has Marfan syndrome. That's about 200,000 people in the United States. This is the man that discovered the disease, Anton Bernard Jean Marfan. He lived from 1858 to 1942. He was a pediatrician, that is a doctor for children. And he defined the disease in 1899. Of course, it's named for him, but this is also 35 years, 34 years after the assassination of Abraham Lincoln, before the disease was defined. But Lincoln had medical doctors around him. Presidents have tended to have lots of attention medically. And these doctors wrote down lots of things that they observed in Lincoln. So we have their notes on Lincoln to go by. And even though the disease was not defined until 1899, from what doctors wrote in the 1860s about Lincoln, it certainly appears that he had this disease, Marfan's syndrome. We're going to take a look at several different health organizations and what they say about Marfan syndrome. First, the Mayo Clinic. Not that kind of Mayo. Lincoln's gaunt appearance is not proof of Marfan's, according to doctors at the Mayo Clinic. Lots of people have a gaunt look to them and do not have the disease. Items that do fit, Lincoln was extremely tall. He had a slender build, narrow face, loose joints, spinal abnormalities, and chest abnormalities. These are all things that are indicative of Marfan syndrome, and they have been reported by doctors who were taking care of Lincoln. So symptoms can vary from person to person. Here you got a bunch of chickens that kind of all look the same, but one is quite different. Most dangerous symptoms are not visible, such as, how your wrist and hands, the double jointedness that we talk about, or the elongated fingers. Those are very visible things. But Marfan syndrome also affects your heart. You have enlarged arteries are common, and aortas rupturing. See how this aorta has expanded outward at this place, and then that thins out the wall of the aorta, and it's easily bursts, more easily bursts there. The National Institutes of Health. Lincoln was tall and thin, according to the National Institutes of Health, and that meets one of the requirements for Marfan syndrome. He had long legs and long arms. He had large, narrow hands. He was stoop-shouldered. He was loose-jointed. Many people commented in their diaries about things he could do with his fingers and hands and so on. He walked with a shuffling gait, which is not an uncommon situation for people with Marfan's, and he had visual problems. If he was looking at you, you thought one of his eyes was looking up. Now, the National Institutes of Health also found that if you go to Lincoln's second great-grandfather and then go down another line of the family, he had a cousin who was diagnosed with Marfan. So it might have been like a second cousin anyway. And it is a genetic disorder. So here's another member of Lincoln's family who was diagnosed with Marfan's syndrome. National Institutes of Health also talk about the eye problem, visual problem here, but it's the wrong kind. Here's the far-sighted problem. And Lincoln was far-sighted, or was nearsighted, not far-sighted. So here are plaster casts that were made of Lincoln's hands. Now, lots of people mentioned how his hands seemed unusually large and fingers long, yet these plaster casts that were made of his hands appear muscular, powerful. They're not slender. They don't look elongated. Are they improperly labeled? Was it somebody else's hands? Nobody knows. Lincoln could be tested for the disease because we have Lincoln body parts, hair and bone in particular, that is on display in a museum. And they were collected at the time of his assassination. When you're shot through the head, there's lots of little bits of bone that fall away or fall apart. And if these bones were released for a test, and it would just take a chip of one of these bones, we could see if Lincoln tested positive for Marfan syndrome. But these bone fragments are not being released by the National Museum of Health and Medicine. This is a display of the Lincoln bone fragments at the National Museum of Health and Medicine. Other disease possibilities for people that have Marfan's, maybe they have something else. Maybe Lincoln had something else. Multiple endocrine neoplasia. Now, you abbreviate the first letter of each of the titles of that disease, MEN, and it becomes MEN 23B. So this MEN 23B, it's a genetic mutation. Overactive glands are a result. Tumors can form in the body, mostly a tumor in the thyroid or in the adrenal gland. There are throat problems. Now, we know Lincoln had throat problems, high squeaky voice, raised roof in the speaking in the mouth. Both men and women get this. Remember that MEN is the initials for the disease. Here's a woman that has the disease with these very similar symptoms to Marfan's syndrome, including that what's called a thin eye, where the eye actually is pointed upward. Again, this long, narrow body, such as you see on this gentleman, these symptoms that we see in Marfan's also occur in MEN2B. There are samples of taken from Lincoln's death artifacts. Some are from Laura Keene's dress. Laura Keene was one of the actors in the stage play that Lincoln was at on the evening that he was shot. And she went up the stairs to where the presidential box was located and went into the room and held Lincoln's hand, and she got Lincoln's blood on her dress. But there is nothing conclusive has been found. Here, this is a sample of her dress from a museum collection, and you can see there is blood on it. Now that blood's been tested. But this gentleman, Henry Rathbone, and his fiancée, he was an officer in the Civil War for the North. He and his fiancée were invited to sit with the Lincolns at Ford's Theater on the evening of the assassination. Well, of course, Rathbone rose up once he heard the shot and began having a fight with John Wilkes Booth, and Booth stabbed him. And his blood, Henry Rathbone's blood, may well have gotten mixed in on Laura Keene's dress. So they're not sure what they're testing. Plus, it's very old stuff. It's 160 years old now. This fellow, Henry Rathbone, has an interesting history. He married the woman that he was sitting in the booth with the evening of the Lincoln assassination. And they received so much attention that when they got married, they decided to move to Germany. And while in Germany, Rathbone had some sort of mental disorder, and he ended up killing his wife. The Germans placed him in a asylum where he died in 1911. The blood samples that we have from that evening are now, 150, 160 years old, and they may well be very degraded. So is it MEN2B? We don't know. Other disease possibilities, we're going to look at Richard Norton Smith next. This is kind of interesting. He worked at the Washington Post, and he's a journalist. You know, journalists writing histories, they're much more readable generally than academic historians who write. Academic historians frequently tend to write for other historians, whereas journalists tend to write for a much broader audience. Well, Richard Norton Smith, as a journalist, wrote about Lincoln. Smith contends that Lincoln died of the Civil War. He didn't die of some disease. Well, that's kind of a strange opinion, but Lincoln did say, the war is killing me. Lincoln, natural death. What would have happened to Lincoln had he lived? Had he not been assassinated in 1865, physicians today say, from what physicians in 1865 had been writing about Lincoln, that he surely would have been dead of Marfan syndrome by the end of 1865. So interesting. I mean, we have probably always thought of the assassination of Lincoln as costing him years and years of life. Fact is, he couldn't get out of bed that day in 1864, may have had a heart attack. He may have well have been into the advanced stages of Marfan syndrome at the time. Most think so. He would have been dead by the end of the year. Remember the heart attack, he was unable to get out of bed 2 weeks before the presidential election. And that ends the section on Marfan syndrome. Now, another interesting thing about Lincoln is his sexuality. Many think he was bisexual. Some say homosexual. Let's take a look at that. This is a book, The Intimate World of Abraham Lincoln by C.A. Tripp. It's New York McGraw-Hill book. You can get a Kindle copy, where it'll read the book to you for $18 on Amazon. You can get a paperback copy of this book for $24 on Amazon. This is Mr. Tripp. He's a clinical psychologist. He did work as a young man under Alfred Kinsey, who started all that sex research back in the 1950s at the University of Indiana. And Tripp is an expert in gay rights or gay sexuality, called homosexuality through most of Tripp's career. Now, friends of Lincoln's were males in the Speed family. This is James Speed, and he was the Attorney General appointed by Lincoln, served in Lincoln's cabinet. He had a brother named Joshua, who was a law partner of Lincoln's, and they regularly shared a bed together over a 4-year period. Now, okay, that sounds like homosexuality, but not in Lincoln's day. Men shared beds. When you went to a hotel in the 1800s, you could sleep in the same bed with 3 or 4 other men, depending on the size of the bed. Everybody would pay a quarter, and men would all sleep in the same bed. So simply saying that Lincoln slept in the same bed as his law partner, Joshua Speed, that was common practice in the 1800s. Let's take a look at some comments about Lincoln indeed being gay. Pro comments, pro versus con. At the age of 20, Lincoln wrote a poem about marrying a boy. Pretty unique for that time. People did not come out as gay, as homosexuals in the 1800s and in most of the 1900s. So C.A. Tripp says, this is very unusual, even though the sleeping in beds with men isn't. And this picture, of course, is not Lincoln writing the poem. He was 20 years old at the time, but it's an older image of him, pen in hand. Carl Sandburg has written a 4-volume biography of Lincoln. In that biography, he says about Joshua Speed that he had a streak of lavender and was soft as May violets. At the time Sandburg was writing this 4-volume biography, this is how we spoke about homosexuality or gay men in particular. So Sandburg, in the research that he did for this 4-volume history, drew the conclusion that Joshua Speed certainly was a gay person. The diary of Joshua Speed, most literate men kept diaries, especially if they became people of wealth or substance. Joshua Speed kept such a diary. It is owned today by Larry Kramer, the gentleman you see here, who is a gay rights activist, and he's in Davenport, Iowa. And in that diary of Joshua Speed's, Speed outlines a sexual relationship with Lincoln. He writes about it, says he had one. This is Lincoln's stepmother, Sarah Bush Lincoln. She outlived Lincoln by 4 years, died in 1869, and she stated in interviews that Lincoln never took much interest in girls. Interesting thing that I don't have a slide for in here too is Lincoln agreed to marry his wife, and at the ceremony, he didn't show up. And they waited a year. And then Lincoln showed up and married his wife. So something kept him from showing up at the wedding a year before it actually occurred. Con arguments. Politicians need relationships with men. D.H. Donald. This is Donald's book, simply entitled Lincoln, David Herbert Donald. He said, so what? You're dealing with men all the time. There's very seldom been women involved in politics, especially national politics. So pay no attention to the fact that Lincoln hung around with lots of men. It's possible, but highly unlikely, that he was predominantly homosexual. Michael Burlingame, in his book, Abraham Lincoln, A Life. Again, this is volume 1 of a series of books, and these books are available. So Abraham Lincoln, A Life by Michael Burlingame. And Burlingame says, highly unlikely he was predominantly homosexual. It's not saying he wasn't, but he was saying he didn't practice it frequently. As a boy, Lincoln knew about homosexuality. It's in the Bible. Lincoln read the Bible regularly. His stepmother talked about the books that he read. We know that Lincoln regularly read the Bible as a young person. William Lee Miller is the author of this book, Lincoln's Virtues. So it talks about this very issue. Claims are almost certainly a hoax. Gabor Barit. Here, the Gettysburg Gospel by this gentleman who states that these claims of gay or homosexuality by Lincoln are a hoax. So here you have a person says, absolutely not. Claims are based on a tortured misreading of conventional 19th century sleeping arrangements. And that certainly is true. All men slept together with other men, especially if they were single. That was not unusual. Here is Schenk's book about Lincoln, Lincoln's Melancholy. So this talks about Lincoln's difficulties, mental disorders, etc. Neutral comments about Lincoln's sexuality. This is Michael B. Chesson. Chesson wrote, Lincoln's homosexuality offers some insights, but the case is not proven. And he writes, Lincoln, quote, was a very strange man, one of the strangest in American history, the oddest to reach a position of national prominence. Homosexuality would clarify some issues about Lincoln. His sadness, loneliness, secretive nature. So there's lots of possibilities. You can believe almost any or either side of those arguments. The fact that in the 1860s these were questions makes me think that there must have been something to it. Lincoln's occupations, we'll talk about that. He was a lawyer and a politician. He never attended school for college or law. Lawyers generally studied under another lawyer for a period of time and then were licensed as attorneys. As a politician, when he was president, Lincoln would, his purpose of the war was preservation of the Union. It was very late in the war before Lincoln started talking about slavery as a possible outcome of the war. So he started talking about that, started saying that we need to get rid of slavery. But throughout the war, he was preserve the Union person. And that's in the Constitution, that the preservation of the Union. Note, here's Lincoln giving a speech. Notice his arms outstretched. You're giving a speech to a large audience. You want them to see you. So you'd flare your arms out like this, and you would move your arms about, and people would be able to keep their eye on the person that was talking. A major issue in the Lincoln administration was railroads and the federal government. This is, I call it, this is where the link starts. Republicans married to corporations. The beginning of a strong federal government for the United States was when Republicans came to power. The Republican Party was founded in 1854 in a small town in Wisconsin called Ripon. And from that very early day, there was a link to corporations. Now, we think of the Republican Party, they were anti-slavery. They were also pro-business. From the beginning, we don't hear about that very often. And they were founded really when corporations were beginning to become national in scope in the United States. And it didn't just involve railroads. It started with all the armaments that were needed for the Civil War. So, hey, start making arms like crazy, we'll buy them from you. Started with armaments here. Here, this is basically a repeating rifle, but it's a multi-shot, also cannons. But the really massive association that lasted over several decades was with railroads. Pacific Railway, 1862. 180 million acres of land was given free to railroads across the United States. They were told you can build track in the middle of this property that we are giving you. So U.S. territories that spread all the way westward, you now are telling the railroads you can have this strip of land to build the tracks on, and we'll give you all the land 10 miles north, 10 miles south, 10 miles east, 10 miles west of where you build those tracks. Well, that became the most valuable property in the country because it meant if you owned that land that was near a railroad, you didn't have to haul the goods you were manufacturing very far, which would be more costly for you. So the railroads get 20 miles of land, 10 miles on each side of the track, and then they get it free from the federal government, and they are then able to sell it at much higher prices than the actual value of it. Well, that's a difficult way of saying it probably, but the value of that land increased dramatically because it was near railroad tracks. So they were able to sell it for a greater price than land that was 20, 25 miles away from the railroad. So Republicans were able to accomplish this in large part due to the 1860 election that Lincoln won. They controlled the House of Representatives, they controlled the Senate, and they controlled the presidency. All three branches are all branches of Congress and the executive branch also. This was the first time in U.S. history that the presidency, the Senate, and the House of Representatives were controlled by the same political party. This gave them a tremendous amount of power to negotiate and basically give away lots of land to their corporate friends. Then the federal government said, you don't have to pay for the building of those tracks. We'll pay up to $16,000 for every mile of flat train track that you lay. If it's hilly land, we'll give you $32,000 a mile. If you have to tunnel, such as shown in the picture here, we'll give you $48,000 for every mile of tunnel that you have to build. Well, amazingly, the estimates for the cost of building these tracks came in higher than what the federal government was willing to pay. So you got $16,000 on level land. Well, that cost us $18,000 to lay that 1 mile of track, so pay us the 16. $16,000 of level land in 2024, that's $499,000. the actual the actual cost today when a mile of level land railroad is built is $170,000. $32,000 for hilly land, and $48,000 for tunnels. You can see the what that amounts to today and what the actual cost is. $32,000 a mile for hilly land. That's $988,000 in 2024. The actual cost in 2024, when hilly land has track built on it, is $340,000. So it's you're roughly at about a third the actual cost. $48,000 for tunnels. In 2024, that would be almost $1.5 million. Actual cost is $510,000 for building railroad tracks through a tunneled area. So the cost of each mile of track laid by the railroads was higher than the government was willing to pay. Consequently, the railroads got the maximum amount that the government said they were willing to pay. And the reality is they had not spent nearly that much. But the argument that's used is it benefited US citizens. It got goods to market much quicker. It was a much better deal for everyone because you got goods that you maybe wouldn't have gotten. Well, that's really not the case. Here's a book, Late 19th Century American Development by Jeffrey Williamson. He taught at the University of Wisconsin when he wrote this book. And what he did is he made a computer program for the latter third of the 19th century, so end of the Civil War to 1900. And he entered as much information as he could possibly gather about economics over that period. He ran the program, and it was came out pretty good. He made some adjustments, and then he said, okay, I'm going to take the railroads out of the program, and let's see what happens with goods getting to market. So he took the railroad out, ran the program, got the same results, same best economic development as if there were railroads. The reason was everything got to market. It just took a little bit longer because there were roads and there were horses and carts. And consequently, all this building of railroads was really didn't add to the economy or the benefit of common people at all. Asians were hired to build these railroads at very low pay rates. Here's an image drawn from the period showing the Asian laborers on the railroad. Agricultural industry today is exempted from immigration. So, we hear all this talk today about immigration. And the fact is, a bill that stopped immigration said, unless you're an agricultural worker, then you can come into the country, not be a citizen. You can work for these large agricultural corporations during harvesting and planting and weeding season and so on. So a benefit to big agriculture in the United States. Gilder Lehrman Institute, where Maury Klein did some of this research. He's the University of Rhode Island. Union Pacific Railway spent $60 million on construction And they billed the United States government for 111 million. They got almost double the amount of money that it cost them to lay the track. How are we doing for time? Should this be a good spot to quit?
Yes, we've got 15 minutes for questioning, if that would be okay.
Okay.
So,
Oops. Can you hear me?
yep.
Okay.
So, yes, I was wondering who was building the railroads during the war, so that you answered that question right there. So,
Oh, yeah. I've lost the image on my screen. Can you hear me?
can hear you,
Okay, good.
and we're seeing you too. So,
Huh. Okay. Well,
do you have a little box at the bottom with the ZM?
my whole screen has gone dark, interestingly enough. I wonder, command.
Try hitting the escape key on the top left of your keyboard, JB. See if that works.
Yeah, that's not doing it, but I can hear. So,
Okay, and we do see you. So,
okay. Strange.
okay, so one of our first questions we're going to go with. Just what biographies of Lincoln would you recommend?
Uh, well, the ones that I talked about, I guess, Carl Sandburg is not considered a historian. He's considered a poet. He got very interested in Lincoln. And that's why he wrote a 4-volume history of Lincoln. Historians say, well, it's not, he's not a historian. They tend to write him off in that fashion. Also, it's very difficult to say what to recommend. There have been more books written about Lincoln than any other president. Last time I saw a figure, there were 16,000 books had been written about Lincoln. And I would say look up Lincoln books online, check for bestsellers. You get descriptions of the book, especially if you go into Amazon or if you go into the website of any publisher. They'll give you 2 or 3 paragraphs. Here's what the book is about. Pick out what you would like, I guess. In the lecture today, I listed a few, and you're certainly welcome to write to me, email me, and I can send you those slides so that you can see what those books were that I quoted from. And my address is small case JB 1717 at the @ Comcast.net. Now that's important. It's .net. It's not .com. Small case JB 1717 at Comcast.net. So feel free to write to me. And otherwise, boy, there's just so much stuff on Lincoln that, and there are movies too.
Mm-hmm.
So check,
We just put JB's email address in chat if you want to go and look at that.
Oh, thanks.
Okay.
And you can go into Netflix or Amazon and look up movies about Lincoln, and then you can go into Wikipedia and ask about the movie, and they'll tell you this part of the movie was total BS, but this part was accurate, and so on.
Okay. So just touching on Marfan syndrome quickly, just since he may have had it, one of our viewers here is saying maybe Kareem Abdul-Jabbar had it, any of those basketball players who are extremely large could have been also a possibility. So,
Yes. Yeah. Actually, you can look it up who had it.
okay.
I just did a few people, and there are there are lots and lots of people that you can read about, and indeed some basketball players. Part of the difficulty is coordination, and you still have to be able to play the game.
hmm Okay, someone's wondering if you're going to return to Lincoln's family in earliest years in your upcoming
Yeah,
classes.
yes. I'll go through Lincoln from day one onward and talk about the moves that the family made all the way from Kentucky to Indiana to Illinois and so on. And yeah, we'll talk about Lincoln's entire life here in the future.
Okay. Yes. One of our first questions was, did Mary Todd Lincoln get an unfair reputation for not being strong mentally and emotionally?
Uh, yeah, she, her, and I'm going to talk about her mental health situation and the difficulties that it ended up making between her and her son, Robert Todd Lincoln. So I'd prefer not to answer that
Mhm.
question now, but I will say this much. Her son had her committed to an asylum.
Okay.
And I'll give you all the details on that when we get to that part of the lecture series.
Okay. Touching back on Marfan syndrome again, has it shown up in great grandchildren or other relatives of Lincoln besides that um, cousin,
Yeah. Uh,
like the descendants?
the problem is the Lincolns had four sons. Three of them died before they reached a marriageable age.
Okay.
And so only Robert Todd Lincoln survived. And Lincoln's last grandson died in the 1980s, and there are no direct descendants of Lincoln now.
Okay.
Yeah, so it's a difficult thing to measure with direct descendancy. Impossible.
Okay. Quickly touching back on railroads, someone's just wondering, how did refrigeration affect the railroads?
Mm.
Um,
Um,
Not sure.
it meant that they could transport uh, food items in particular, especially food items that would rot or spoil or whatever, so that was a major accomplishment for railroads was refrigeration. Same thing with over the road semi trucks today. Many are refrigerated. And I just sitting here, I cannot remember when refrigeration began, but I can look that up for next week. So,
Okay.
yeah,
Let you make a quick note there.
yeah.
Um, so we're looking at our last question that I have here. I'll let you write.
Go ahead.
Was there any other historical data on Lincoln's health, mental or physical, or any kind of personal diary?
Well, not that I know of just off the top of my head, but I would suspect among all the books that have been written about Lincoln, there's certainly some that deal with that, other than just the book by that I mentioned. But no, I don't. I don't know of one. Sorry.
Okay. So in terms of that one poem that was written? Is that collected somewhere or just
Well, I'll look that up also. Let me,
some, like, obviously somebody else saw the poem, so it must be located in some collection.
well, yeah,
So
it's interesting. I never thought about providing the poem, but let me see if I can find it this next week. This is the poem on, okay, good. And then, yeah, the previous question I was going to look up too. Yeah, okay. What was that again?
the previous one? Oh, okay, I'm looking at the wrong one.
Yeah, thanks.
Um, was there any other historical data, that one, on Lincoln's health, mental or physical?
Oh, sure. Okay.
Any kind of personal diary? I think that's the one that I asked previously.
Yeah, good. Thanks. I got it.
You don't always ask these in order, but that they come in, so.
Yeah.
Okay,
Good.
so, probably one time for at least one more, if not two questions. Was the hiring of foreign laborers, like the Asians, for the railroad a common practice in the 19th century?
Yes. Yes, it was. And of course, on the West Coast, it was mostly Chinese. Now, I don't mean Asian using that term. There were some Japanese, but it was by and large Chinese laborers who worked all along the West Coast, building cities, doing agricultural work, building railroads, etc. And the growing industry from 1865 to 1900, which is known as the age of corporations, um, they were looking for the cheapest labor that they could possibly find. And a lot of those people, such as Andrew Carnegie, are richer than the richest people alive today. If you take the $30 billion that Carnegie had and project it into today's economy, they're wealthier than Elon Musk. So yeah, that's still an age of tremendous wealth, and lots of those families have had their homes made into museums, and you can visit the homes of these very wealthy people. And they would corner markets. There weren't very many regulations yet during that period. That didn't start till Teddy Roosevelt came along. He said, "I'm going to start limiting these corporations," and there
So
were
James J. Hill would have been one of those beneficiaries of the funds for building railroads?
for,
James J.
so say it again.
James J. Hill would have been one of the beneficiaries of those funds?
Yes, yes. And next week I'll show a map of land that was given to the railroads, including James J. Hill land.
Okay.
And, yeah, it's he gained a tremendous amount of territory from Minnesota across to the state of Washington, building the Northern Pacific Railroad. Yeah.
Oh. Okay, well, we are just at 2 o'clock. I want to thank everyone for joining in, for asking questions. And we thank you, JB, and we hope that we will see you all next Wednesday for our second in the series on Abraham Lincoln. Thank you, Grayson, for all of your help in the background there for running our tech. And I hope everyone has a good day.